Namaskaram. Dear brothers and sisters, this conventional greeting in India has many meanings. And one of the more beautiful meanings is, you and I are one. I believe the main theme of this convention is regenerating brotherhood. And what better way to regenerate when we really feel this, when we do it. It's the first time in my life that I'm speaking to an audience whose average age looks like more than 50 years. I'm used to speaking to a much younger audience, so you will kindly bear with me if I tend to put on my professor's hat. This is a science theosophy lecture, and just to clear the air, especially for many people who are not used to the terms science and theosophy, I would like to begin by giving some simple definitions. The word science originates from the Latin scientia, which means knowledge. It is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about the universe. It assumes that there is an objective reality shared by rational observers and governed by natural laws which are discoverable by systematic observation and experimentation. The pure sciences, the so-called hard sciences, are physics, chemistry, and biology. These deal with the exterior, physical, material, sensory motor world, the outer world. Which means, if science were to investigate, for example, the moment of enlightenment of Gautam Buddha under the Bodhi tree, it would, and it still would find itself on difficult ground. Because enlightenment of the kind that Buddha experienced is a subjective experience. It belongs to the inner world, no less real to those who have experienced it as the outer world. What is possible in today's science is to measure, and science believes only in measurements, of things related to the physical body, the brain waves, etc. But it would still view with considerable skepticism about the reality of the subjective experience. That needs to change. And that can happen only if we revise this definition of science from an understanding of objective reality shared by rational observers to an understanding of both objective and subjective realities shared by equally competent observers. So to look at the interior aspect of life, there are other sciences, the so-called soft sciences, such as psychology, sociology, linguistics, cognitive sciences. But these attempt to deal with the interior aspects as well as the exterior aspects using the same measurement methods of the hard sciences. And so they have limitations. Theosophy refers to a state of inner enlightenment or of divine wisdom that a person can attain through intellectual and spiritual evolution. You see in that definition, the words enlightenment and evolution appear. It is the wisdom underlying all religions when they are stripped of accretions and superstition. So the underlying belief is that through the course of human history, certain deep structures have been discovered which are common across the world to all religions, to all masters who have experienced inner enlightenment. And the challenge today is to be able to sift the chaff from the grain, to be able to remove the accretions and superstition. And the real problem in the world today, the conflict between scientists and so-called spiritualists, between science and religion, is the kind of obvious animosity scientists have, not so much to theosophy, because I don't think there's any difficulty with theosophy, but precisely with those accretions and superstition which seem to cloud the wisdom in religion. Enlightenment in a secular context often means the full comprehension of a situation. But in spiritual terms, it alludes to a spiritual revelation or deep insight into the meaning and purpose of all things. A state of supreme knowledge and infinite compassion is how one would describe the Buddha's enlightenment. A fundamentally changed consciousness whereby everything is perceived as a unified field. And lastly, evolution refers to any gradual directional change. I will begin with a Sufi saying, God sleeps in the rock, dreams in the plant, stirs in the animal, and awakens in man. When that awakening becomes manifest, then and then only truly man can experience the true meaning of divinity. In the olden times, they too had a science, especially in India. The material world was believed to have the characteristics of Panchabhuta, the 5 elements, all emerging from ethereal spirit, ether, becoming more gross, first in terms of air, then cooling and consolidating into fire, into water, and into earth. the material world, as well as the non-material world, is pervaded with spirit. This is what all the wisdom traditions have said. This is the perennial philosophy. And both material and non-material forms of consciousness are so wonderfully diverse. There's so many of us sitting here. You can hear the birds. You can also hear occasionally the cell phone ringing. But even the cell phone tunes are all different. The way you cough is different. And these are all expressions, if one would only care to listen, of a supremely mysterious, divine nature. All forms that we see, according to traditional wisdom, have emerged and will return to formless spirit. Today, with the advent of science, we don't talk anymore of 5 elements. We now talk of 118 elements. But really the material world has not changed much. If you look at the material world, which is what really is of concern to scientists, and even to most of us, we will find that we live in a world of appearance. We really do. We have been hardwired to see things on the surface. We see beautiful people around us, and if we had X-ray vision, it wouldn't look all that beautiful. You would see beautiful skeletons all around us. And below this surface appearance, which is accessible to us through our 5 primary senses, there are deeper layers of reality. And if science and theosophy is in quest of deeper truths, then we must also, in the same vision, be able to apprehend and comprehend that inner reality. And what is that inner reality? Well, let's take the scientific view. Even scientists need to take a leap in their imagination to enter that world, the world of atoms and molecules, the world of infinite energy packed so beautifully into whirling electrons and quarks with unimaginable speed. And recent scientific theories have even spoke about a quantum field where anything is possible, where things emerge and things disappear with movements that cannot be predicted with any degree of certainty. Particles are waves, and they're not even physical waves, they are probability waves. And the same physics tells us that much of the space that is there beneath the physical object is empty, truly empty. If you look outward to the sky, and you can even use a telescope to look at distant stars and galaxies, you will find a similar scenario. Vast empty spaces where the so-called solid matter occupies a billionth of that vast space which is expanding. So we are living in a rather empty world, and science says in that huge infinite empty space, life as we know exists only here. We don't know. But as far as we know today, we occupy a precious location in the universe, right here and right now. But if you look again at the furthest galaxy, located billions of light years away from here, which means it takes billion years for light to reach our eyes, you will realize that you're actually looking at the distant past. So even time gets warped. And it's a real wonder to see this mystery of infinity, which is actually a huge void, no different from the void that someone like the Buddha apprehended without the use of any microscope or any telescope. But it's not really an empty void. It's a void full of possibilities. It's a pregnant void. And I'd like to switch from science to the Upanishads with a story. Being a teacher, I know how difficult it is to sustain attention. And the older you grow, you realize you're really no different from little children. And the best way to keep you alive is to narrate stories. So this is a story of Shraddha Kapoor, I think from the Chandogya Upanishad. In the olden times in India, we had gurus. Guru literally meaning dispeller of darkness. We had rishis. They were married like you and me. They were not monks. They had children. And it was a convention that the guru will not teach his own child. So Shraddha Kapoor happened to be the son of Uddalaka. And Uddalaka sent away Shraddha Kapoor at the age of 12, the tender age of 12, to a fellow teacher. And Shraddha Kapoor spent 12 years of his life learning. And when he returned at the age of 24, the father was anxious and eager to see whether the son had discovered the highest truths. So he asked a simple question. Son, do you know what Brahman is? And as good students tend to do, the son unhesitatingly reeled off a series of shlokas defining Brahman. The father looks intently at the son's eyes and said, "That's not what I asked. Do you or don't you know what Brahman is?" And for the first time the son paused and looked at his father's eyes and realized that his father was asking for an experiential truth, not a cerebral understanding. And he could see that his father knew. And so he paused. In those days, you don't say sorry, you just lower your head and be silent. Then the father asks, okay, now do you want to know? Because the father could see that the son was on the verge of attaining self-realization. May I suggest that all of you switch off your cell phones? It's nice to hear the music, but it's even nicer to hear the silence. And so, Shraddha Kapoor, whose eyes were glued on his father's feet, that was the tradition, waited. And the father said, and they were seated under a tree, a peepal tree. The father said, do you know how this huge tree came up? The son says, but says it little hesitatingly because he knows that his theoretical understanding may not be the true answer. He says, from the seed. Father says, let's take a look at that seed. Can you go and pluck a fruit? And so a fruit was plucked from the tree, and the father, this is science, okay? This is experimentation, this is observation. Father says, show me a seed. And so the son breaks open the fruit and pulls out a seed. And the father looks and says, you mean to say this huge tree has come from that little seed? What's the secret inside the seed? Shall we explore? And the son was asked to break open the seed and to report his findings to the father. When the seed was broken open, the son says, I can't see anything. And the father says, from that void, from that apparent nothingness, this huge tree has emerged. From that void, you and I and the whole universe has emerged. You are that. Tattvamasi, Shraddha Kapoor. Today's cosmology says the same thing. It says, based on fairly rigorous mathematical calculations, because it's been established beyond doubt that the universe is expanding. Which means if you go back in time, it would have been much smaller than it is today. And if you work out those calculations, you can take it to the limit to discover the origin of the universe. And that has precisely been done. And it's generally agreed, though the date of birth is not all that certain, that approximately 13.7 billion years ago, this universe, as we know it, with its huge galaxies spreading billions of light years around the earth, was born. And just like we are born from a single cell, that itself is a wondrous thing, isn't it? A single genome can contain an entire human. The whole universe was born from something so small that you wouldn't be able to describe. That was the Big Bang, as it's called. What was there before the Big Bang? That's the same question. which Uddalaka asked Shvetaketu thousands of years ago. There was that same void. Has that void gone away, or is it still there? Now it's for each one of us to experience. How do we experience? We experience by exploring our inner dimension. And anybody can do this. When the mind goes quiet, absolutely still, so still that even the bird's sounds are penetrated through, you discover a state that is truly indescribable. A state where there is no world, there is no you, there is no time, there is no space. Incidentally, even the scientists say that it's not that the universe was born at some point in time into some space which was already there. No. Space and time were born at that point. So it's really mind-blowing. And this is science. This is science pointing. And there's more to it. Scientists are very keenly interested in this. And cosmology is very recent and still a growing field, and more discoveries are waiting to be unfolded. But there is a great interest in knowing how from this huge explosion, this massive expansion and cooling and formation of matter which did not exist before that, how from all that, this is 13.7 billion years ago, how from all that the earth was formed approximately 4.7 billion years ago. Life, never seen anywhere else in this huge expanse, showed its first signs of appearance 200,000 years ago, from single cellular organisms to full-grown human beings like you and me. And how the human that you and I would recognize today is of very recent origin in the whole history of the universe. And calculations show that there are about 20 parameters which are still not fixed with certainty. But clearly the fact that life is there right now in this universe shows that a certain set of combination works well. And it is proved that if any one of those parameters has a very marginal deviation from what it should have, life would not exist. So it's a very precarious condition. But scientists would still not accept that there was a divine hand underneath this. And really it doesn't matter. They are quite happy living in a meaningless universe, but I think you and I are not. I wouldn't want to live a life that is meaningless. So, I think it's a very good practice to notice this mystery on a daily basis. If you ask me, on an hourly basis, pause in all your work and just pause and look in sheer wonder at this experience of absolute mystery. Notice the mystery. Breathe the mystery. Be the mystery. One of the greatest scientists the world has known was Albert Einstein. And he had a taste for this. There was a mysticism in his outlook. And he said that the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. There are only two ways to live your life: as though nothing is a miracle, or as though everything is a miracle. And I think the real challenge for all of us, and especially for elderly people like you and me, is to discover that freshness and aliveness in every moment. Because the fire that was there when we were young has a tendency to naturally wither. But you'll find that those who have certain integral life practices will show that sparkle even at the age of 100. The sparkle in the eye, the fire in the belly. Time for another story. So, this one is from a beautiful book written by Father Anthony de Mello. I think it's called The Prayer of the Frog. And it's a story about a priest, a very devoted priest who used to run a church, Father Benedicto. And this was way back. And it started raining, and it didn't stop. So it rained in the proverbial style for 40 days and 40 nights, in the old biblical way. And the waters were rising, and people were scared. Father Benedicto, being a very devout religious person who had led his congregation with absolute devotion for the past 40, 50 years, was sure that God would save him. And so, when he saw the waters rising, he encouraged all the others, the lesser mortals, to escape. There were boats passing by, and he encouraged everyone to take those boats and move to safer regions. But he chose to climb on top of the roof, and he waited. So there was the first boat which came when the waters had reached his thighs. He said, "Father, get in." Father says, "No, the Lord will save me." The waters reached chest high, the second boat came. Father was firm in his conviction and said, "No, the Lord will save me." Even when the waters reached his nostrils and death was imminent, he stood firm. And as the story goes, the waters went up and he died. And the next scene, it's like a play. Next scene shifts to the court of St. Peter. And he finds himself standing in line with all kinds of people in front and back, ordinary folk, not priests. And when St. Peter greets him with joy and says, "Welcome to heaven, Father Benedicto. Why do you look so glum?" The father says, quite honestly, he says, "I feel betrayed And St. Peter smiles and says, "What do you mean? We sent you 3 boats." And that's a very, very meaningful story. Especially for the elderly. Because we think we know everything. We've seen the world. We know more than others. But we just don't know anything. We don't know anything. We are like the space occupied by the earth in this universe, tending to zero. And so that wonderful humility, it's saying, I don't know. And if you're a true theosophist or a true spiritual believer, you will have the humility to at least admit, even if you can't feel it, there is divinity everywhere. And I think that is the challenge. That is the regeneration that all of us need to invoke all the time. And it has to be done in new ways, because you'll find that all spiritual practices, no matter how sophisticated, no matter how inspiring when it begins, tend to flatten, tend to deaden. And only you know it, because you should feel it. You should feel that vibration in you. And when you feel the deadening, which comes from extreme self-awareness, then you know it's time for regeneration. And I think this is an important truth that is so important, especially when you tend to belong to organizations. Who is not a member of the Theosophical Society if our brotherhood is truly universal? There are no non-members, and there's no society. I mean in good faith. This beautiful story, which again originated from India, about the 6 blind men and the elephant, is worth remembering all the time. It's so beautiful because it's the exact reality. There's so many of us sitting in this hall, I don't know, 1,000? 600? We're all 600 different perspectives, and we're not even the same perspective the next minute. Everything is changing. All our viewpoints are changing. And we all come with certain initial conditions. All different, all unique. So the story goes, when the 6 blind men came to see the elephant, each one felt one part of the elephant and was absolutely sure. He said, I know what this elephant is. And he was right. He says, this feels like, and he was holding the trunk, one of them, this is a serpent. So I know what the elephant is. The elephant is a serpent. The other person held the tail and said, it's a rope. Third person patted the sides and said, it's a wall. Another one held the leg, solid, thick leg, and said, it's a tree. And so on and so forth. Were they wrong? Certainly not. From their perspective, with their background, with their initial conditions, they were right. Each one was right, but only partially. So it's always good to take the stance that everybody is right in some sense. And you have to be really wise to claim that you have seen the elephant, and the truly wise person would never make that claim. But I think one sign of evolution in cognitive understanding is you are curious. You say, why does that person say it's like a tree? And so the challenge is to give up our position, at least temporarily, and move around and go to our brother and then hold the way the other brother did. And then you say, oh, now I know why he says it's a wall. It really does feel like a wall. So the elephant is much bigger, much more different than what I thought it was. And I think that is evolution. Evolution is being able to see higher perspectives, larger perspectives. It's being able to see views from all angles, the ant's view and the bird's eye view. And that's not easy, because for some reason it seems very important to all of us to cling to our views. And it's important to understand that that very clinging is the biggest obstacle to spiritual evolution. Einstein is also reported to have said that science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind. Today, much of science is lame, and much of religion is blind. And each has provoked this malady in the other.